Now that's how you wake people up at a conference, all right? It's way too sleepy in here. I don't care how many people are in here, we wake you up. Welcome to Wild West Hackin' Fest. Come on, oh my God. We can do way better than that. Welcome to Wild West Hackin' Fest. See, there we go. We're like person again. Oh my God, this is like, I'm so happy we're getting back to the conference scene. We're getting out, we're with our people. We're seeing people like Tony, who is just up here talking about the love, getting back out here. It is awesome. For those of you online, my God, I wish you were here, but I understand why maybe you can't be. But let's dive in. So I know we're a little behind, so I want to jump right in. This is me. Really, that's me. I flew that plane. For those of you that don't know, I'm actually working on getting my private pilot's license. It's something I've wanted to do my entire life. I'm kind of at the point now where I'm in a life situation I can learn to fly planes. So I've started doing that, and that is the plane I'm learning in. It's the ever traditional Cessna 172 Skyhawk. Okay, why the hell is she up here talking about flying airplanes? Well, you see, with airplanes, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, because if you fly airliners, you don't really get exposed to this, but weight and balance is actually critically important when you're going to fly a plane, because how much weight you have in that plane and how you have it spread through the plane and where that center of gravity lies is very important for how the plane flies. So some of you might have had that experience. You're on an airliner and they move you around. They say, hey, we got to move people to different seats because of weight and balance issues. So one of the things they do, and this is where this is going, I promise I'll get to the point quickly, or not so quickly, is in the pilot's operating handbook for the Cessna 172 is this chart. This chart, as you see just a little piece of it, lists every piece of equipment that is installed on that airplane, its physical location, that's what we mean by arm, in relation to a particular point on the aircraft, and its weight, so that we can understand every component that is installed. And any time you make an update to that plane, you install a new altimeter, you rip out all the gauges and you put in a Garmin G1000 or whatever you're going to do, this stuff has to be updated, because you've got to understand what does that plane weigh when it's empty and where is the center of gravity when it's empty, so that as I start putting people and luggage and other things in there, I can account for that and do the calculations and figure out the weight. So, wouldn't that be cool if we had that for software too? There's your hint of where we're headed. But first, a little bit about me for those of you that maybe don't know me. My name's Alyssa Miller. I'm first of all hacker and a researcher. Those of you that were here last night for our panel, you heard me talk about my first hacks. They were back in the days of Prodigy. So this is where I find out who's as old as me or not. If you don't know, Prodigy was one of these dial-up services we had way back in the day before we had the internet publicly available. Bought my first computer when I was 12, broke into Prodigy. It's kind of been the thing I've done all my life, is hacking. I sometimes refer to myself as a hacker turned executive, because I am now the Business Information Security Officer for S&P Global Ratings. What's a Business Information Security Officer? I could write a dissertation on it. Instead, I just created a blog on it. If you care, go check it out. I'm also an author and as aforementioned, blogger. And finally, I'm a former software developer. So I got my start, despite all the hacking in my youth, despite hanging out in IRC chat rooms with hackers throughout my teens. I didn't really get into security as a job. I started as a software developer. And that's given me some unique perspective when it comes to how I deal with security in, ultimately, enterprise organizations. So, let's talk about that thing. Let's talk about the state of software development. So back when I started, software development was kind of an interesting situation of, well, if I had an application, I would write that application, I'd write a bunch of code, and if my application, if I wrote 80,000 lines of code, I had an 80,000 lines of code application. It's that simple. Well, around 2004, we really started getting into the idea of embracing open source. And we started to see things like package managers. Maven showed up on the scene. Now, we were using package managers before, right? I mean, we were using them in Linux distros and things like that. But using them in software development really didn't show up until about 2004 when Maven jumps into the scene with Java. And suddenly now, I can do this really cool thing where I can define a bunch of dependencies. Those dependencies are managed by that package manager, including a catalog that references what those names are and where to go get them. Many of you, if you've done any software development today, you're familiar with this. It's pretty much ubiquitous to how we develop software today. Now, the challenge, or the really cool thing, but the really horrible thing, is that every one of these dependencies can have its own dependencies. So I can write an application that's 80,000 lines of code, but after it's built and all those dependencies are introduced, we're looking at like hundreds and thousands of lines of code that I never wrote. I'm dependent on somebody else. And I can tell you, I can go into my manifest, I can go into my POM file in Maven, I can say, hey, here's all the dependencies I have. But I don't know the dependencies that exist underneath these necessarily. So, I mean, this is all great, right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? I love working in InfoSec, by the way. I get more mileage out of this GIF or this meme than any other. Because really, what could possibly go wrong? Maybe you heard of this company? Maybe you know what happened to them 5 years ago? Maybe your data, like mine, was some of the data exposed 5 years ago when Equifax got breached. Lots of stuff to read on how this happened, but ultimately, if you aren't aware, there was a vulnerability in struts. Commonly used open source software, and well, hey, someone found a vulnerability. Published it in a CVE. The CVE was 2 months old when Equifax got breached. Equifax's story, if you talk to them, is that they didn't know it was there. They just didn't have visibility because it was a dependency of a dependency. It was one of those sub-dependencies or indirect dependencies or transient dependencies. They have all sorts of fun names too, but it all means the same thing. They're the dependencies we don't know about because they are in that tree and there may be multiple levels down in that dependency tree. The end result was 164 million consumers worldwide, predominantly the US and the UK, with a few in France, had their data exposed. Big settlement. This cost Equifax tons of money. It cost the CISO of Equifax her job. Not good. But now we'll fast forward a little. 5 years later, what happens? How many of you heard about Log4j and had to deal with this horse shit? All right, this sucked. All right, but it's the same story. What is Log4j? It's just another commonly used package, again in Java. I'm not sure why we're picking on Java, but Java seems to be the thing lately. It's used all over the place, but someone discovered this really cool remote code execution vulnerability that was trivially exploitable. All I needed was to be able to see your application on the internet and I could exploit it. Well, that's pretty tough. Count them, 3 CVEs ultimately came out of this. That first one was the big one. That was the one that freaked everybody out. And indeed, that's the one you heard me talk about a little bit last night. You know, showed up on a Thursday evening, Friday morning, everybody was freaking out. 91% of Java applications have some form of Log4j in there. According to Sneak, 61% of the projects that are in their platform, 61%, it was an indirect dependency. So that's something that the developers may not have even known it was there. And this is where the problem comes in. But we weren't done yet. Or as my friend Billy Mays would have said, but wait, there's more. Spring! Yay! We're now into 2022. And 2022 starts off with a bang because most people are still dealing with this one. Spring for shell because we're really uncreative in our names, by the way. 3 CVEs connected with this, another RCE. Not nearly as trivially exploitable, thank heavens. It requires a little bit more of a specific situation in your configuration of your application. Like you got to be using Tomcat, you got to be deployed in a work, a few other things. But this is still, especially on the heels of Log4j, freaking people out. And it should be. I mean, it's definitely not as big a risk, but it's a problem. So, what is our answer to this? How many of you have heard of the term SBOM before? What does SBOM stand for? Come on, there were like 3 of you in that same area. 1 of you knows. Yes, the software bill of materials. This is that idea, if you've ever built a house, or if, God forbid, you're involved in engineering somewhere and you've ever built structures, or if you worked in manufacturing, you know there's this idea of a bill of materials, which is basically kind of like that airplane example. This is everything that goes into that product. So there's a lot of people in the industry right now who are really promoting this idea of a software bill of materials. How do we build out the idea that here's a master list of all of the software that's included in the package or the product or whatever it is that I'm selling to you? In fact, folks like Josh Corman and others have championed this so well. The President of the United States actually released an executive order requiring any government contractor to provide software bill of materials to government agencies. Wow. Good luck creating that, right? By the way, if you're interested in the text of that order, I put a shortened URL link here just because the link to the White House press release is like a mile long. So that one's a little easier to remember. But I promise I don't get any weird promotion from that. But so this is where the industry is going with this idea. And it's a great idea. I mean, we talk about asset inventories, we talk about all these things, and it's, wow, yeah, it would be great to have it. But just like asset inventories, this stuff is hard. In fact, I would say it's a lot harder even than an asset inventory. Imagine trying to go through your code and all of those directory trees and say, here's everything that's in my software. But our industry has an answer. It's called SCA. So SCA has entered the chat. What is SCA? Anybody know? What does SCA stand for? You came to the talk, do you know? Ooh. Close. Software composition analysis, yes. So this is yet another cool scanning tool that we can add to our product suite. Yay! Our developers love more security scanning tools, right? No, they don't, but I came up here to talk to you about it for a reason, so there must be something good. Couple of vendors that are out there. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, so if you work for one of the competitors of these places or you know someone who does, please don't hang me. I'm just putting some of the bigger names up there. All right, Sneak, probably the biggest one in this marketplace today, but you've also got White Source, which is what I use in my organization, Black Duck. Contrast Security has some capability around this as well. There's a bunch of others. There's even some of this capability that's built into GitHub and GitLab. Spoiler alert, it's provided by Sneak, just in case you were wondering. But so we've got tools. So why does this matter? Well, if you had the opportunity to read through the abstract for this talk, or you didn't just come because, hey, it sounded kind of cool, I don't know. But this is my experience with this, and this is why I've become such a proponent. Also, sidestep here. Full disclosure, I used to work for Sneak. That is not why I'm up here talking about this. I don't work for them anymore. I don't care if you buy any SCA product, that's completely up to you. I don't care if you buy theirs or not, completely up to you. But I believe in SCA largely because of this. Log4Shell shows up Thursday night, Friday morning, we're like, holy crap, we got to deal with this. 8 hours later, 8 hours into the start of a formal incident, which most organizations did, started up an incident because, my God, we have got to address this thing. It's hideous, it's ugly, it's everywhere. Most organizations didn't know where they had this. 8 hours later, I had a laundry list of 948 places in the code that's used across every application in my division. I knew everywhere we had versions of Log4j. I knew what version they were. I knew which ones were vulnerable, which ones were not. Imagine the value of that. You walk into an incident. We had, quite honestly, within 2 weeks, we had remediated every single internet-facing application in our environment, which when you're talking about forklifting, something that is integral as something like Log4j, that's pretty damned impressive. In fact, I'll tell you that 2 weeks in, when I was celebrating the fact that all of our internet applications had been upgraded to non-vulnerable versions of Log4j, I'm talking to my peers in the industry, and they're like, yeah, we're still trying to figure out where this thing's existing. And that's the reality of it, because that's how our code works. I mean, I think back not too long ago, there was a vulnerability in, I think it was in OpenSSL that impacted medical devices. And the FDA released a statement on it, an alert. And they released it in very unusual FDA fashion because it provided no recommendations or specific recalls. Why? Because none of the vendors nor the FDA could say what products actually had that open source library in them. So to be able to do that in 8 hours is incredible. To be able to fix that in 2 weeks, which required massive coding changes in some of these applications, because this stuff ain't backward compatible, folks. It was, hey, you're going to change that. It's logging. It's everywhere in your app. I mean, it gets used a ton. That was impressive. And I wasn't alone in this. There were a number of people I talked to who did have similar programs in their DevSecOps pipeline, and they too were able to generate these inventories and very quickly start responding. So what's really interesting about SCA is that it really moves us to a point of enabling the idea of DevSecOps. Right, so 2008, Andrew Schaefer, Patrick Dubois, they get together, they create this thing, DevOps, and they say, we're going to make devs and operations work toward the same common goals, and we're going to deploy as fast as possible. We're going to make this smoother than ever. We're going from code to deploy in the smoothest possible fashion. And security said, holy crap, what do we do? Wait, you mean we don't have those long design cycles where we can sit there and do threat modeling and all this really cool stuff? No. Oh my God, you guys are speeding up. So 2012, only took us 4 years to get on the train. Josh Corman and Gene Kim, they go to RSA and they give a talk where they kind of introduce the concept of DevSecOps. How do we get security into this? It's 2022, and we still, as security practitioners, suck at truly integrating security into the DevSecOps pipeline. If you were here last night for Doc's keynote, he talked about this a little bit. He didn't get into these specific terms, but he talked about that concept of, where we bring the tools, we introduce gates, we slow things down, we're always a cost to the development team. We are always a cost to the product. We are the thing that makes things impossible. We're the department of no, all of those things. SCA starts to move us beyond that. And the reason it does this is because SCA, more than any other security tool in your entire arsenal, is geared toward developers. It plugs into their repositories. It integrates with their tools, their CI tools, their build tools. It makes a world of difference when you can meet them where they live. Now, I'm not up here to preach that SCA is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It doesn't. SCA will not find novel vulnerabilities in anything, okay? I swear to God, I am not up here to sell a product. But I am selling the concept because it is important. Now, this can be accomplished with freeware tools as well, but understand that it's dependent on things being reported as CVEs or being discovered by researchers. So it's not going to find that open SQL injection vulnerability that one of your developers introduced because somehow they bypassed all the framework controls and are still allowing free-form text. Okay, it's not going to find those things. Now, a lot of the commercial providers are integrating other capabilities with SAST, and so you can leverage a lot of that. But the point is, again, I loved the keynote last night because it made a lot of points that I wanted to touch on, which is we don't need to be perfect, but we need to be incrementally better. And this is one of those capabilities when we can actually understand just the software that we're dependent on. Those open source packages that we're bringing into our software, what do they actually mean? Where do they exist? And can I respond quickly? So I am going to identify vulnerabilities that get introduced in the development lifecycle. There could be vulnerabilities where, hey, we've been using this version of, name your favorite package, and we just keep using that one because we know how it works. Well, now when those things have vulnerabilities, you can find that in your pipeline. It's integrated in your pipeline. It shows up. You know about it. But better yet is that scenario I mentioned, where a new vulnerability gets reported, maybe in a not so popular package, and now you get an alert where you have that capability to find this. So where this really works well is in creating security champions within your development teams. What's a security champion? If your concept of a security champion, because I know this is an idea that gets tossed around about quite a bit. If your idea of a security champion is that it's a security person who works in the engineering team, we should talk after this. That is not what a security champion is about. A security champion should be an engineer. A security champion should be an engineer who is your advocate, or more importantly, is an advocate for secure practices, who understands them and can be that person within the team who understands this. And with tools like SCA, or with that capability, oftentimes they can provide this. Again, you don't have to do this with a commercial tool. This can be done in Eclipse. You can actually walk a directory tree, so you can actually catalog this stuff. Now, is that going to tell you every time a new vulnerability shows up in one of those packages? No, you would have to find a way to monitor that. The commercial tools do that. Okay, fine. But what this starts to do is it builds that enablement. DevSecOps, if we really want DevSecOps, it's about us being able to enable. Wow, I really just said that. It's about being able to enable the developers to do the security thing without us having to watch over them, without us in security having to provide stage gates that slow them down. See, the problem with the DevSecOps pipeline is that it flows in one direction when it's working. So if we put stage gates in there that have long feedback loops, I say, hey, all right, when you go to build, well, you have to run a security scan, so we're going to do SAST tool. Oh, by the way, that SAST tool, we ship it off to some third-party vendor who does the scan. It comes back in a week, and then if there's any higher critical vulnerabilities, well, you have to stop, go back, and fix that. You broke DevOps right there. And if you're trying to get security introduced into that, you just lost your invitation to that party. So giving them tools that meet them where they live is a great advantage here. Now, as I kind of mentioned, incident response wants to join us too. Because when you have an incident like this Log4j, this is a tool that makes a difference. This is a capability. I should stop referring to tools and refer to capabilities because it is a capability. Think back, literally, being able to provide a report like that hours into an incident that says, hey, here's all our stuff. Yes, I did redact out the paths. Because this is real. I told you, 948 places we had this vulnerable package that we had to respond to. We were able to produce this that quickly. And the only reason it took that long were outside factors that slowed down the initial capability to actually generate the report. The data was all there. So this is what we can do when we start looking at the idea of our dependency trees and understanding what is in those dependency trees. But it goes on, because guess who's joined the party? Compliance has joined the chat. Shit. Predictably, yeah. We pick on compliance, right? Compliance are those people, God, we love to hate them for some reason. And I don't understand it. Well, I kind of do, but compliance people are amazing. I mentioned who I work for, S&P. By the way, if you don't know who S&P Global is, you've probably heard of the S&P 500. It's kind of a big deal. So we are heavily regulated. I talk to 37 regulators around the globe every year. My compliance people are important people to me. And you know what? Being able to make them happy or give them the information they need to do their job saves me some really tough questions from folks like the SEC. By the way, if you've never dealt with the SEC, pardon my French, you have? Do they fuck around? No, not in my experience either. They are incredible people, don't get me wrong. I don't mean to disparage one bit. I absolutely love what they do many times. Sometimes they can be tough to work with though. But they don't screw around. Especially since 2001, they really understand the importance of their role. So compliance is interested in this. Compliance sees the value in this because for one thing, I can give them really cool, meaningful metrics. The metrics I can pull out of this capability by understanding what is in my software, it is not, oh, hey, yeah, we have 100,000 open vulnerabilities, or we have 5,000 critical vulnerabilities, or whatever. Those numbers are so meaningless. But when I can go in there and I can say, because this thing is integrated into my pipelines, I can say, hey, we did this number of releases, we identified these, we stopped, if you remember from last night's keynote, we stopped this number of vulnerable packages from being introduced to our environment. That's something that's meaningful. You don't get that with some of these other capabilities that we push. We push things like SAST and DAST and whatever. And the problem with those is it's really hard to quantify a situation like that. Because it's, well, SQL injection was on these 5 forms, but it had all these different variants. And before you know it, try to quantify that to somebody. Just to explain what it means, you get so deep. This they can understand. And now, in fact, thanks to Log4j and Shell for Spring for Shell and all this other business, they understand it a little bit more than ever before because it speaks to supply chain security. There's a buzzword that you can use to your advantage. Supply chain security. Our open source is our supply chain. But this isn't the only reason why my compliance people like it. Licensing. This is something that gets really complex in the open source market. Because here's the thing. Those licenses change all the time, and you may not get notified. You may have a subdependency you don't even know is there, and somebody decided to switch from one license to another. How do you know? Now you're releasing that software. Boy, when you get that cease and desist letter asking for royalties and stuff for something you didn't know was in your software, that's a really panicked feeling. So one of the side benefits of this capability is that I can look for licensing. And indeed, both the open source, there it is, open source tools and the commercial tools available will help you with this. These are important things to be on top of, and your compliance people will love you for this. To be able to say, yes, we're confident that every component of our application is appropriately licensed, that we don't have that risk exposure, that is huge. And your customers would like a word. That SBOM thing I talked about. How many of you work in an organization where your customers send you security questionnaires? I see at least one hand, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've been dealing with this for a long time. My very first security role in financial services years and years ago, this was something we had to deal with all the time. And usually it was because they came to us first and they wanted to pen test us. All right, I'm not letting every one of my 5,000 customers pen test the same system. we do have to keep the doors open. So we got to the point of having to have security questionnaires, have the ability to make our customers comfortable that we were doing the right things. And if you're providing software or firmware to your customers and something like Log4j happens, I guarantee you they'll be reaching out. If you're not hearing about it, I promise you somebody somewhere in the company is. We did it with our own vendors when we were responding to Log4j. We were reaching out to everybody. I had to talk somebody off the ledge who wanted to go after Microsoft and yell at them because we hadn't gotten an answer from Microsoft in a week. I'm like, all right, cool. Slow your roll. They're kind of a big deal. I get it. We're big, but they're big too. So chill. In fact, they're bigger than we are. So slow down. But no, that's the reality of it. So your customers want to be a part of this too. And when you have this information and that's something that you can provide them, you can say, yes, here's our software bill of materials. Maybe you don't even have to follow, when we talk about SBOMs, there's a lot of talk right now, a lot of academics going on around formats and how do we do this information sharing. Even if you don't want to go to that degree, but just being able to say, yeah, here's the list, here's our dependency tree, here's the things. Somehow, whatever is acceptable to you without giving up too much proprietary information, you have that capability now. So I brought you all here under the promise that I was going to tell you how to make the case for this. Because it's great that we can all sit here and we can talk about, the wonderful benefits and yeah, wow, Alyssa, sure, maybe you all are kind of seeing what I'm saying. Maybe you agree with me. Maybe you think I'm full of crap. I don't know. Hopefully you're all still here at least, so that's a good sign. That maybe I'm not totally blowing smoke up your, yeah. But how do you build a business case? Because everything I've told you so far, if you go in there and you explain it to your leaders, whatever level you're talking to, if you explain it to that business side the way I just explained it to you, I'm not sure you're going to get the results you want. So let's talk about how do you actually build a business case for this thing? And it all comes down to this. Anybody who tells you cybersecurity, and by the way, actually, side note, sorry, going to completely digress for a minute. Let me go on a tangent here. I use Cuba Gooding Jr. for this. Why does everybody who uses this meme use Tom Cruise when Cuba was the one who actually created the line in the movie? I don't know. Sorry, small pet peeve of mine, but it was actually, if you listen, he's the one who first says the line. Back to reality. So the reality is, this is what your executives care about. Anybody who tells you that your executives, when you're a cybersecurity leader and you go into a board meeting or an executive committee meeting, that they want to hear about risk, get ready to see the door. Because here's the problem. When we talk about risk in cybersecurity, we assume we are risk, that we are the risk. If you don't have an MBA or you haven't studied this in some way, maybe this is news to you, but risk is a huge subject. There's business risk, there's financial risk, there's market risk, there's liability risk. There are a laundry list of things that make up this global thing we talk about as risk. In cybersecurity, we're just one little small dot in all of that. And here's something I like to tell people when they're thinking about how do we talk about, well, we have to talk about risk, right? Think about this for a minute. If you're going to go in and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to enable your business because I'm going to reduce your risk. I'm going to reduce the risk. Business is all about taking risk. Every product that they've put in the market, they have already considered the risk. They have already accepted the risk of putting that product in the market. All of those various risks of which were just that one tiny little dot in the corner, they've already considered that and accepted it. So reducing that risk doesn't do anything to accelerate the business at all because they've already said it's okay. Even if they didn't understand it, they already said it was okay. So when you talk to an executive or you talk to a business leader about, I'm going to reduce your risk, you're basically telling them nothing. You're telling them that, yeah, this thing that you already said is okay, I'm going to make that less, and by the way, I need $1 million program to do it. All right, that's an effective sales pitch. So let's try something else. How do we connect what we're doing with business objectives? Again, Doc's keynote last night, and I apologize if you weren't there for it. If it's recorded, I think it is. Please go check it out because he made a lot of these same points. What we do from security perspective has to align with the business. Business has objectives. We need to align with them, and we need to actually do things that make it more efficient, that make it able to expand into new markets, to position themselves better. So how do we do that from a perspective when we're thinking about, I want to bring in software composition analysis abilities? For starters, I'm building faster efficiency in our pipelines. When I think about software development, and I think about tools that meet my developers where they live, that provide me a significant level of security assurance without having to be the thing that stands in the way or slows down the pipeline, that speaks volumes. I'm going to make your development faster. I'm going to help your engineers see that the products they're using are safe. I'm going to help them figure out which ones they can use, where they should be focused, and now they're not introducing new ones that create more backlog work for them. Your engineering teams, your DevSecOps teams, your DevOps teams, whatever you call them, they don't like big backlogs of bug fixes. Understandably so. Your product teams definitely don't like it because that's time being spent on priority one issues that takes time away from creating cool new features for customers. So if you tell them, hey, we can introduce this security capability that is actually going to allow us to deploy more feature functionality quickly, that's a business value. That's cybersecurity standing up there and saying, hey, we understand what's important to you. We understand the goals of the business, and this is how we're actually going to make it happen more effectively. So when you think about those repeatable processes that Doc was talking about last night, this is where we want to be. We are going to speed up those pipelines. We're not going to stand in the way. We're going to enable our developers to do the security thing to create ultimately, and I love this term I got from a colleague of mine, a security-empowered culture. Security-empowered, meaning they have the ability, they have the know-how, they understand how to do the security thing without slowing down their job, without it being that extra thing they have to worry about. Okay, great. So pipelines. Well, what about incident response? They wanted in on this chat. Speaking to the ability to be resilient. This is where we have to flip that messaging. We have to stop talking about the idea of we're going to secure everything. Focusing on being resilient. How can I reduce our recovery time? How can I make it so, hey, if I've got to deal with another log4j situation, yes, I might have to pull some developers from other projects that they're working on, but I'm pulling them just long enough to get them to make a code fix. I'm not pulling them so they can spend 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months sifting through code to try to figure out where all we have a vulnerability, where all we have a vulnerable package that's buried 5 levels deep in our dependency tree. I'm going to take all of that out of the process. So not only am I again speeding up the pipeline, I'm also reducing our recovery time. I'm making us more resilient to attack because we can address those attacks quicker. That's meaningful. That's something that drives a business forward. That's something that helps save money and helps ultimately make money. If I can keep my engineers focused on what they're supposed to be doing and not focusing on emergency responses to every new vulnerability that crops up, and trust me, there's going to be more. This is what we can talk about when we go in there and we want to actually share something of value. We're not reducing risk. We're not preventing breaches. One of my pet peeves, sorry, another tangent. I'm great with tangents, by the way. Another one of my pet peeves is the person who walks into a meeting, and I actually shared this last night, so sorry if you're hearing this again, but walks into a meeting where they're trying to get funding for something, and they throw out this old cliche of, it's not if you get breached, it's when. But by the way, give me $5 million so I can make us unbreachable. Great sales pitch. How do you expect that one to go? But we do that. Right? So start flipping that script, because ultimately what we need to be looking at is how do we focus on strengthening our resiliency, not perfection. Doc talked about this last night. Like I said, I was sitting there listening to his talk. I'm like, this is so perfect. It fits right into everything I'm going to talk about tomorrow. Maybe I should just have him give my talk. But no, seriously, this is why, okay, if I focus on software composition analysis, well, what about SAST? What about those novel vulnerabilities that my developers are introducing? This leaves that gap. Maybe we're not finding that. Maybe, but you're taking a serious step forward. You know, those of you that are familiar with AppSec or familiar with development, you know what CI/CD is. Continuous integration, continuous integration, continuous deployment. What if we add one more CI to that? Continuous improvement. Continuous improvement needs to be the focus of our security programs, not preventing breaches, not creating, impenetrable walls. We are there to continually get better. We know we're chasing a moving target. We know. I had a board member ask me, so when do we reach the point that we don't need to keep investing in additional cybersecurity measures? My answer was, well, yeah, when technology stops changing. Hasn't done that in my 44 years on this earth. Oh shit, I just told everybody how old I am. Okay. But it is, seriously, technology is not slowing down. Technology is changing more and more every day, because with more technology that we create the ability to create more technology. Yeah, that was a mouthful, and I actually spit it out. So, stop focusing on that end state. There is no end state. Stop focusing on being perfect. Stop focusing on being unbreachable, unhackable, whatever the term is that you hear the next, vendor throw out there or whatever. We deride vendors for doing that, but then we do it in our conversations with our business leaders. We act like we're going to stop the breach, and then we say silly things like, well, it's not if, but when. Okay, well then stop telling me you need more money. If you can't protect me from it, I'll just buy insurance and cover it that way. Wonder why cyber insurance got so popular so fast. So flip this script. Set that new messaging. If you're going to go in there and you're going to propose anything, whether it's software composition analysis or you're going a completely different direction, you want to propose something else, flip that script. Talk about something more of value to them and get them out of the mindset that we're ever going to achieve an end state here. Lastly, information security, cybersecurity, whatever we want to call this role in our organization. We have been chasing the Holy Grail, and we've been failing. There is one thing that means so much more to the business than anything else. Yes, it's money, but there's a specific piece of that. We've talked about the idea of it. I've seen Bruce Schneier blog on it. I've seen a number of different security people pontificate on it in talks, the idea, but I've not yet seen anybody actually connect it. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, what that Holy Grail is? What is the one thing that you can bring to your board, your executives, your leadership team, the thing that's going to make the business stand up and say, yes, we want to support that? We want to take a guess, a wild stab? Profit. This is what enables profit in a big way. Think about your marketing teams. There is this idea of, imagine the magical world where cybersecurity is a competitive advantage. Something we can go to market with in a way that is actually tangible, that is not some dubious claim about, we take your privacy and your security seriously. What if you can actually put something out there that is a competitive advantage? Imagine the competitive advantage, especially in today's world, where, as Tony mentioned last night, cybersecurity benefits from more awareness than we've ever had in the past. Imagine that world where then you can go out and you can say to our customers, look, we can provide you this SBOM. We can provide you this inventory, this assurance of what's in there, not only to say that, hey, we've done the work to try to make our stuff secure, because that's this nebulous claim, right? That doesn't work. Nobody wants to hear that. But what you are telling them when you say, I can provide you with this and I can provide you regular updates with every release, is you're saying, I'm giving you the information that you need to be able to verify that my stuff is safe. Or to be able to know when it's not and be able to take appropriate actions to mitigate the risk in your network until I give you another update. That is a competitive advantage in today's world. That is something where you can actually take something about your cybersecurity program, go out there credibly and talk to a customer and say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're helping make you safer. This is how we're going to help enable you to use our products and be assured that they're safe for you. That's something we've been chasing in cybersecurity for a long time. We've not been able to do because it was always so nebulous. Oh, we do pen tests every quarter. We do pen tests every release. We run all these tools, and yet somehow we still end up vulnerable. Again, flipping that script to, there's no end state here. We know things are going to happen. We know 0 days are going to show up in our software. But here's how you'll know about it right away and be able to take action without having to send us emails and harass us or do things of that nature. So think about this differently. When we're talking about making the case for something like this, look at all the ways you saw. I've presented to you all of those touch points, all of those areas of the business that aren't necessarily just cybersecurity related, that are improved by this simple capability, well, not so simple capability. Simple, okay, yeah. Sure, that's why people are selling tools that do it, right? Not simple, but important. And when you do have the capability to do it, it does feel simple. So, thinking back to that airplane again, thinking back to how we can provide that same detail of, yes, here is every piece of equipment that's installed. It sounds impossible when you think about like how would you sit down with something like an airplane and do that? And yet they do it. The FAA mandates it, and it happens. We can do the same thing with software. So I'm going to leave you with a really simple quote from Winston Churchill: perfection is the enemy for progress. This fits right in with what's, I think, becoming a theme at this conference this time. Started last night with the keynote you're hearing here. I've heard the same message in a couple other places. Tony was just up here before me, again delivering that message. Focus on that continual improvement. Flip that script, bring that message home, make that the expectation, provide the metrics that show that progress, that show how we're getting continually better, not how we're tracking to some ridiculous goal of zero production vulnerabilities, because it's never going to happen. But give them something to use so they can measure the progress and see that we're constantly getting better. So with that, I invite you to reach out to me anytime. This is where to find me on social media. Certainly happy to have more conversations with you, talk about this, talk about other crazy stuff. Talk about barbecue. For those of you that already follow me on Twitter, you kind of know what I'm talking about there. Twitter is by far the easiest way to get in touch with me, but LinkedIn or my website do work too. So thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it. I mean, honestly, I think, oh no, we are definitely at time. So I'm going to wrap things up, but thank you again.